The rain had been falling over Lagos for 3 hours straight. Bella Okafor stood with her back against a cold concrete wall, her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts, listening to the sound of police sirens somewhere behind her and the slower, more terrifying sound of her best friend's footsteps drawing closer. She had known Valenria Eze for 19 years. She knew the way she laughed with her whole body. She knew she took her tea without sugar and cried at supermarket commercials and kept a photograph of her late mother tucked in the front pocket of every bag she owned. She knew all of it. Which is why, when the knife appeared, Bella's first emotion was not fear. It was grief. "Valenria, it is not what you think. I couldn't have..." "Oh, so you think I care about the memories we had together?" Valenria laughed. Behind them, police vehicles had sealed off both ends of the street, their flashing lights turning the wet tarmac into something that looked sickeningly like a stage. Officers shouted commands through megaphones. None of it reached Bella. Everything real was standing right behind her, breathing hard, trembling with 19 years of love gone to ruin. "Val," Bella whispered, "please." 3 weeks earlier, Bella and Valenria had been doing what they always did on Sunday evenings, sitting cross-legged on Valenria's living room floor in Lekki Phase 1, eating jollof rice straight from the pot, watching a reality show neither of them cared about, talking over every scene. Bella's phone had buzzed on the carpet between them. She'd reached for it and tilted the screen away. A small gesture, almost nothing. Valenria had noticed. The name on the phone was Damola Adewale, Valeria's boyfriend of 4 years, the man she had quietly, carefully begun to build a future around. Not because he was perfect, but because loving him had felt, for the first time since her mother's death, like being allowed to want something again. He had been sending Bella messages for 6 months. Not confused messages, not accidental messages. Deliberate ones, detailed ones, the kind that require effort, the kind that require the deliberate daily decision to deceive someone you claim to love. And Bella, God help her, had been writing back. She had told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she would end it. She constructed elaborate justifications in the private theatre of her own conscience, that she hadn't sorted out, that she had tried to discourage him at first, that it was emotional, not physical, that Valenria would never need to know. She told herself all the comfortable lies available to a person who is doing something unforgivable, and she arranged them neatly in the silence between herself and her best friend. And for 6 months, the silence held. Until Valenria found the phone. Not a suspicion. Not an instinct followed to its bitter conclusion. The literal phone. Unlocked, face up on the kitchen counter when Bella had stepped out to take a call from her mother. 6 months of messages, loaded and glowing. Valenria had read every single one. She had not confronted Bella that night. She had set the phone back down exactly as she had found it, said nothing, smiled through the rest of the evening, and waited. That waiting, that deliberate, controlled silence was perhaps the most frightening thing about what followed, because it was not the behavior of someone who had snapped. It was the behavior of someone who had made a decision. For 3 days, Valeria had planned. She had followed Bella. She had watched Damola's apartment. She had driven past the restaurant where they had met. Just once, just a coffee, according to the messages. But once was enough. Once was a door that could never be closed again. She had gone to the kitchen drawer where she kept her father's old fishing knife, the one she had always meant to throw away, and she had looked at it for a long time. She had thought, if I cannot have the life back that was taken from me, then at least I will take her with me into the ruin. It was not a sane thought. She knew that. But grief is not a sane visitor.
What neither woman knew, what no one in their immediate circle knew, was that Damola Adewale had a history.
Inspector Adaze Nkosi of the Lagos State Criminal Investigation Department had been building a file on him for 8 months. It had started with a complaint from a woman in Abuja, a professor of economics at the University of Abuja named Chisom, who reported that a man she had been dating had systematically manipulated her and her closest colleague into mutual suspicion, destroyed a 12-year friendship between them, and then vanished when the destruction was complete. The pattern, once identified, was almost elegant in its cruelty.
Damola would find 2 women whose bond was exceptionally close, sisters, lifelong friends, business partners. Women whose trust in each other was the structural foundation of their lives. He would enter the orbit of one of them romantically. He would spend weeks learning both women's insecurities, their private fears, the fault lines in their friendship that every friendship carries. And then, with surgical patience, he would begin.
He would tell each woman private things about the other, half-truths mostly, close enough to real to be believable, angled just enough to sting. He would manufacture opportunities for one to feel overlooked by the other. He would send messages that created proximity where none had been sought. He would water the seeds of doubt he had planted until they became something neither woman could see past. When the friendship finally collapsed under the weight of all that manufactured pain, he would be long gone, untouched, unreachable, already searching for the next 2. There had been 3 confirmed cases before Bella and Valeria. Abuja, Port Harcourt, a woman in London who had taken out a restraining order that expired before it could be properly enforced. Each time, Damola had relocated, changed his job title, updated his social media to curate the image of a man of culture and warmth. Inspector Nkosi had been searching for a jurisdictional hook that would allow an arrest. She had found it 47 minutes before midnight on the night of the hostage situation. A financial fraud attached to one of his previous identities, traceable to a Lagos bank account that had never been closed.
By the time her officers arrived at Murtala Mohammed International Airport, Damola was already in the departures terminal, carry-on bag in hand, heading for a flight to Accra. He did not go quietly, but he went.
Back on the wet street in Surulere, the standoff had been ongoing for 11 minutes. The lead negotiator, a young officer named Constable Bello, who had been on the job for 14 months and had never handled anything like this, was speaking in a measured, practiced voice that cracked slightly whenever Valenria shifted the knife. Behind him, 6 other officers held their positions, weapons raised, but not aimed, waiting. Bello could feel the tremble in Valenria's hand. She had felt this tremble before. 6 years ago, at Valenria's mother's funeral in Enugu, Val had stood at the graveside in a black wrapper dress, holding the programme with both hands, and the paper had shaken with exactly this frequency. Not with sorrow, but with the effort of not showing sorrow publicly. Valenria Eze did not cry in front of crowds. She never had. She would rather hold a knife on a public street in the rain than let strangers see her fall apart. Which meant she was falling apart.
Val, Bella said quietly,
Not for the officers, not for the cameras she suspected were recording somewhere in the dark, just for the two of them, the way things had always been between them. I know you're not going to do this. You don't know anything about me anymore, Valenria said.
I know everything about you. Bella's voice broke, but she kept going. I know you sleep with 3 pillows. I know you cry at supermarket commercials about fathers and daughters. I know you've been secretly applying to architecture school for 2 years because you're afraid your father will say a law degree is too expensive to waste. I know you loved Damola because he was the first person who made you feel safe after your mom died. She paused. And I know that what I did is the worst thing I have ever done to anyone. There is no version of this where I deserve your forgiveness.
Valendria's grip loosened. Barely. But Bella felt it. But Val, he manipulated us both. That is why the police are here tonight. That's what they discovered. That's the terrifying truth.
Inspector Nkosi stepped forward then and spoke in the calm, unhurried voice of someone who had decided the only currency that mattered now was honesty.
She told Valenria about the file, about Chisom in Abuja, about the woman in Port Harcourt, about the restraining order in London. She told her about the pattern, the deliberate selection of close friendships, the engineered betrayal, the exit strategy. She told her that Damola was at this exact moment being processed at a police station on Lagos Island, his boarding pass folded in an evidence bag.
She said, "He chose you both specifically because of how much you loved each other, because that was where it would hurt the most." Silence. The rain fell. The knife dropped.
The knife clattered against the wet asphalt, and the officers moved. Valenria did not resist. She stood completely still as Constable Bello approached her, and when he reached for her arm, she looked at him with an expression that had gone past rage, past grief, past everything. An emptied expression, like a room after a fire.
Bella was immediately surrounded by 2 female officers who wrapped a foil blanket around her shoulders and guided her toward one of the waiting vehicles. A paramedic checked her neck where the blade had rested. A faint red line, nothing more. She would be fine. Physically, she would be absolutely fine.
Valenria was placed in a separate vehicle and driven to the station for processing. She answered every question put to her in a flat, cooperative voice. She did not ask for a lawyer. She did not ask for anything. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and stared at the middle distance like a person who had already left the building. Bella was taken to a state protection safe house in a quiet residential street in Ikoyi. It was protocol, Inspector Nkosi explained. Standard procedure while the Damola investigation was formalized and the question of charges against Valenria was assessed. The safe house was clean and modest. A 2-bedroom flat with a small kitchen that smelled of fresh paint and a window overlooking a garden of overgrown bougainvillea.
Bella sat at the kitchen table for most of the first night, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea, going over and over the same 7 minutes on the wet street. Not the knife, not the fear, the tremble in Valeria's hand, the way her voice had fractured on the word anymore.
By the second morning, word had reached Valenria, through the duty solicitor who had taken her case, that Bella was at the safe house, that she was alone there, that the officer assigned to her was rotated out at 4 in the morning, leaving a gap of approximately 40 minutes before the next shift.
No one is certain how Valenria obtained this information. The inquiry that followed would spend 6 weeks trying to trace the leak and conclude only that it had come from within the station. Someone who knew her, perhaps. Someone who felt that the situation was more complicated than the paperwork suggested.
What is certain is that on the third night, at 3:47 in the morning, a car was seen parked 2 streets from the safe house, and Valenria Eze, released on police bail 40 hours earlier, was sitting behind the wheel. She had the address. She had a spare key she had somehow obtained to the building's outer gate. This too would become a matter of investigation. She sat in the car for 26 minutes, according to the surveillance footage, perfectly still, engine off, watching the front of the building. She was not holding a knife this time.